Noon, so let's get started. And it's my enormous pleasure and honor to chair this seminar this afternoon with our Stanton Nuclear Security Fellow, Sitara Noor. And she will be speaking to us today about a topic near and dear to my heart, that is combating illicit trafficking of nuclear and other radioactive materials through a regional nuclear security regime in South Asia. Scott Sagan and I have been working with Sitara since she arrived here as a fellow, and it's been a real pleasure as she is converting her dissertation topic at the University of Vienna. I've got her PhD in the summer of 2025, working here to convert it into a book. So you'll hear parts and pieces of that today that we hope will appear before too long as an article. But it's just been a great pleasure to have someone here working on this critical topic. Sitara, I already mentioned that she got her PhD from the University of Vienna in July of 2025. She also has had a number of very good fellowships, including at the Belfer Center at Harvard University. That's one of the Managing the Atom Fellows, which is a good title. And she was a fellow at the NATO Defense College in Rome, also near and dear to my heart, given my association with NATO, but that's an excellent institution. So she has been a fellow at the VCDNP in Vienna, and I assume that was part and parcel of your work there during the period of your PhD studies. But earlier in her career, she worked as an international relations analyst at the Pakistan Nuclear Regulatory Authority. So she knows this issue from the inside out, also including from the inside of the Pakistani establishment. So that's, I think, adds a special interest and special expertise to this topic. So without further ado, over to you, Sitara.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rose, for the kind introduction, and thank you everyone for joining today for this discussion. As Rose mentioned, I'll be talking about illicit trafficking issues in general, specifically, and talking about the prospects of establishing a nuclear security cooperative mechanism under the framework of nuclear security regime in South Asia. So when we talk about illicit trafficking threat, some of the headlines that we hear in the current international media or the news reports that emerge always tend to highlight that there is an alarming trend in nuclear material trafficking, and that basically hints at some of the urgent security gaps. And radiological nuclear terrorism has been an issue which is there, I think, which started making headlines in the early 1990s in the post-Cold War environment, when after the Soviet disintegration, there were a number of instances where nuclear material was being seized at the international border. There was a report of nuclear material being missing, and they were largely, it is important to highlight at the early stage of when the phenomenon started, or when the issue started making headlines. It was mostly incidents of some opportunistic thefts, where because of the lax security arrangement at some of the former Soviet nuclear facilities, some of the insiders or the workers working at those facilities probably took some material out and tried to sell it into the international black market. At that time, there was no significant threat of nuclear terrorism, or so there was no demand per se. There was supply of nuclear material, but there was no demand per se. And this is the chart basically is the International Atomic Energy Agency's database that they have started establishing since 1993. When the report started emerging worldwide, and since then they are keeping track of how much material has gone missing and what has been reported. But it is also important to highlight that this database only refers to the officially recorded or officially reported incidents which state voluntarily report to the International Atomic Energy Agency, but some separate databases which are being maintained, for example, at Center for James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation, or there is another database which is independently maintained by University of Salzburg. The amount of reports in those individual or those open source databases is much higher than what is officially being reported at the International Atomic Energy Agency. So that is just to give you a sense of the enormity of issue. It's not just the officially reported cases, but the issue actually goes beyond that. So after 9/11, as I stated earlier, in the initial year in the 1990s, perhaps there was a gap between the supply and demand. But in the post 9/11 environment, there was a serious concern that the probability or possibility of nuclear material being used for the terrorist purposes became real. And when we talk about nuclear terrorism risks, William Porter and Charles Ferguson has written about the potentially 4 phases of nuclear terrorism, what they call 4 phases, in which they talk about potential theft and use of an intact nuclear weapon, construction of an improvised nuclear device, sabotage of a nuclear facility, and a radiological dispersal device or dirty bomb. In these 4 phases, perhaps the first 2 are highly unlikely, but with a very serious consequences. But the remaining 2, that the sabotage of nuclear facility and radiological dispersive device, is perhaps that draws more attention, because the possibility of these incidents happening is much higher, although still not much higher in terms of the possibility of them actually happening. But in the list of that, perhaps these are the more concerning areas. And for the purpose of this research, from the perspective of illicit trafficking concern, I think the construction of an improvised nuclear device through a stolen material, and the 4th phase, that is a radiological dispersive device or a dirty bomb, that is more significant from the perspective of this research. And may I also add another potential phase of nuclear terrorism, which is nuclear spoofing, and that is more relevant in areas where states are in a conflicted or adversarial relationship, like South Asia, where terrorist outfits might try to instigate a conflict by using certain nuclear materials. So that's an area we also be considering moving forward, or while talking about security in general. So as I stated, post 9/11 perspective changed, and the risk of nuclear terrorism became more real. And there was a risk, and after the reports emerged that a certain terrorist outfit, for example, Al-Qaeda and ISIS, reportedly were trying to acquire nuclear material or weapon. As I said, acquiring a weapon is highly unlikely and highly difficult task, but acquiring material is perhaps a lower hanging fruit from the perspective of the terrorist. So that proverbial gap between supply and demand began to shrink slowly and steadily, because at the same time, there were terrorist outfits that were trying to acquire that material. And on the other hand, there were continuous reports of nuclear material and radiological material being missing at various international, in various countries. South Asia's vulnerability is much higher, and that risk is perhaps few notches up in South Asian region because of there are multiple reports of loss, theft, and seizure of nuclear material in the region. And this region is considered, because of the primarily adversarial relationship between India and Pakistan, it is often termed as a nuclear flashpoint, and it is it receives a lot of attention because of a number of activities with regards to transnational terrorism. And that is why perhaps I'm exploring the possibility of establishing a nuclear security regime that would bridge the existing security gaps. The research questions broadly, I've simplified the research questions here, broadly looking at is there a need to establish a regional nuclear security mechanism? What are the distinct rules, values, principles of a nuclear security regime that we can identify as a distinct measure? And what are the driving factors that will incentivize the competing states to engage in such an arrangement? And lastly, I would highlight some of the features of a regional nuclear security regime that can be established among hostile states such as India and Pakistan. When we talk about regimes, when we look at the global regimes in the nuclear domain, non-proliferation regime emerges as the predominant one, with besides the WMD export control regime and strategic nuclear weapons regime as well. For a longer time, nuclear security was considered a subset of a non-proliferation regime, but I have tried to separate that from the perspective, like I argue that nuclear security has its own peculiar set of rules, principles, and procedures, and that is why it's a distinct regime. And within that, we can also separately identify nuclear safeguard regime as well as nuclear safety regime. And those regimes are very much established under the framework which works at the International Atomic Energy Agency. So these are some of the principles, norms, rules, and procedures of a nuclear security regime that I think distinguish it from other regimes, and that actually makes it a distinct form of regime that operates in its own domain and needs to be seen distinctively from the rest of the areas, so that because of the peculiar work that it does. Methodology of this research design is basically descriptive and analytical, involving mixed method, both qualitative and quantitative analyses. Primary and secondary sources, the information on the primary sources is primarily semi-structured interviews and expert survey, not from the general public, but specifically from the experts, security experts from the region, as well as from people in other parts of the world who work on South Asian nuclear issues. And the research takes a prescriptive approach in outlining involving risk of illicit trafficking and proposing cooperative mechanism under the nuclear security regime framework. So the expert survey broadly looked at the question, first and foremost, questioning the responders whether they have a good understanding of nuclear security, because as I keep on saying that it is really important to see nuclear security as a very distinct subject from non-proliferation or a WMD debate otherwise, and the identification of experts as a nuclear security experts. And I'll probably go on to the next slide, which basically gives respondents profile, in which 51% respondents were experts having a good understanding of nuclear security, and 21% identified themselves as nuclear security experts. Perception of nuclear security risks, probability of nuclear terrorism from low to moderate, risk of traffic material used for terrorism low to medium, existing global nuclear security arrangement, effectiveness of that materials arrangements, 57% said give their response in negative, and nuclear radiological terrorism in South Asia could trigger a war. The prospects of happening that and it's leading to a war, 69.7% give an affirmative response. And testing the possibility of a nuclear security regime being working, could work in South Asia. Existing CBMs reduced the risk of almost 67.3% of the respondents agreed that the nuclear CBMs that are already working in South Asia have reduced nuclear risks. And the need for additional nuclear security CBMs, there was a 90% support and potential for technical scientific cooperation, specifically with regards to that regime that we are talking about. 60% saw that there is a significant opportunity in that area. So going back to the question of discussing why is there need for a regional cooperative mechanism? While we have some of the systems already working at the International Atomic Energy Agency, there are national responsibilities that states are already undertaking. Why do we need that an additional layer of security? So first of all, if we start with the in South Asia, for example, that's the case study that I'm specifically looking at. Nuclear Security Index 2023 ranked India and Pakistan on 40 and 49 respectively. I mean, Pakistan scored a bit higher than India, but overall, that's not a very best score to have anyway. And there is another category-wise comparison of how India and Pakistan have basically fared on that regard. In the domestic commitment and capacity, security and control measures, global norms and risk environment, while countries are struggling and coming up with the more areas to work they are working in, but there are still lacks security, and there is still gaps that needs to be filled, and we'll find out in the next few slides. So there is this map which basically identifies some of the measures that India and Pakistan have in place. These maps basically identify some of the nuclear installations. Pakistan seems more populated because that actually depicts some of the facilities that have some significant amount of radiological materials, whereas India's is only is showing where there are some nuclear power plants in action, operating nuclear power plants currently. And then India and Pakistan both have established respectively their centers of excellence in which they are not only training their local staff, but providing international trainings to the people from different parts of the world. Both countries have their respective centers of excellence, in which this is the picture from the Pakistan's Physical Protection Exterior Lab that they have established with the support of the International Atomic Energy Agency. This chart basically shows the level of regulations and the rules, the laws that exist in Pakistan, starting with PNRA, Pakistan Nuclear Regulatory Authority, ordinance, regulations, policy, orders, and regulatory guides. And this is the latest bill that has been passed in India's parliament, which basically repeals the previous bills and gives a new bill which basically advances India's objectives of the nuclear material. But it is important to highlight that even within this bill, there are some measures which need further attention. For example, India for the longest time did not have an independent regulatory body. Unlike Pakistan, as a response to its signing of International Convention on Physical Protection of Nuclear Material, as a requirement to that, Pakistan established a independent regulatory body in 2001, whereas India till date did not have it. Under this new bill, which has been recently passed in the parliament, India has provided for an independent regulatory body, but it is important to highlight that regulatory body oversees India's nuclear management only from safety perspective. It does not cover security, which I think still leaves some areas open. So when we talk about existing challenges, and these challenges are not region specific, these are universal in nature, but they very much apply on India and Pakistan as well. First and foremost, there is a capacity shortfall, and in view of the expanding nuclear material stockpiles and infrastructure. If we look at and specifically, if we talk about India and Pakistan, the amount of nuclear expansion, the corresponding regulatory measures in both the countries is perhaps not sufficient to cover or sufficiently secure or regulate the infrastructure that is being built in the countries. There is lack of human resource, that is lack of other resources as well. So this is an area which is, as I said, is a universal challenge, but very much available, very much visible in South Asia as well. And then there are technical limitations in the physical protection system. Again, these challenges are universal in nature. For example, one of the technical limitations in the physical protection system comes in the material accounting and control measures. Material accounting and control measure is one of the primary methods which is used to secure nuclear and radiological materials inventory in a country. But it turns out that even in the latest system that are in place, there is still smaller amount of quantity of material which actually goes unaccounted for. And another challenge that comes to surface is that material accounting and control in all the countries, although IAEA requires it, but in most countries, material accounting and control is done from the perspective, and it is not done from the security perspective. And the safeguard perspective's objective of safeguards is to ensure that there is no diversion that takes place in a country. But for security, and the period of a safeguard inspection is not every day, for example. But from the security perspective, there has to be some specific concrete measures in place to ensure that there is no diversion that takes place. And in number of examples of where material has gone missing or lost in various facilities worldwide, this security gap was one of the primary reason that there was material that had gone missing. For example, in US, in Pennsylvania, in the Newmick affair, many of you might have heard about that. In Pennsylvania facility, there was almost 300 kilograms of nuclear material which had gone missing. And out of that, at least 100 kilograms missing material was counted as lapse in material accounting and control. So this was something not considered as big, but from security perspective, that is something super sensitive, and that can actually aggravate the challenges. And in another example, in one of the studies conducted by the Los Alamos laboratory, they tried to test almost 95 security seals that are currently present in the United States and worldwide, for example. And all those 95, the assessment test of those 94 nuclear security seals that are there on the nuclear materials, all of them proved to be faulty, and all of them proved to be, they are not fail-safe, and they could easily be tampered with without knowledge of the facility operators. So that's another technical limitation in the existing physical protection measures that we are looking at. Limitations of the legal framework. There is no overarching treaty or a nuclear international legal framework that looks at the illicit trafficking issue. There are a number of there is a lot of whatever happens in the illicit trafficking area is basically a patchwork of multiple international agreements and international treaties that work on nuclear security broadly, or nuclear terrorism for that matter, and they provide a cover. But in the absence of in an overarching treaty, perhaps a lot goes right, left, and center. And it is also important to highlight that one important factor that comes very often in the IAEA discussions is the nuclear security is a national responsibility. And there is a lack of standardization in the nuclear security measures worldwide just because of that reason. And that is why your interpretation of one treaty or set of legal arrangement would perhaps be different from my understanding of the same treaty or international convention, and my corresponding measures would perhaps be different in that manner. So that's another existing challenge in the existing security measures on the nuclear material that are in there. And employment of emerging technologies is a challenge in every field, but that's a more significant challenge in nuclear security field as well. The AI employment in the material accounting and control, for example, that I mentioned earlier, the same AI mechanism, artificial intelligence accounting and control measures become more vulnerable to cyber threats, for example. And another example, another new material that is being used in nuclear, the new advanced reactors is for example, high Aussie low enriched uranium. The SMRs, the small modular reactors, would have this high Aussie low enriched uranium material. And under the existing IAEA framework, that material is not covered as specifically as it should have been. So that's another emerging technology which is already in place, but there is no corresponding security measures or laws that would cover that area. And that's and the weak security measures for radioactive sources is one of the significant challenges, because in the list of 4 phases of terrorism, where I mentioned that while probability of stealing a whole intact nuclear weapons would be nearly impossible, stealing a small radioactive source would perhaps would not be that problematic for the terrorist outfits, because those radioactive sources are not in a highly security areas. They are available in hospitals, for example. They are available in various other technical fields, for example, oil well logging areas. In cancer treatment, there are significant amount of sealed radioactive sources. The security of those sources is not as high as perhaps needs to be, and that becomes a weak area specifically. And security culture, as I mentioned, that your definition of a certain law would perhaps be different from my definition of certain law, and that lack of standardization creates a gap in the international security. One thing that might work for you, but that is definitely not working for the transnational nature of the threat that we are facing in terms of illicit trafficking of nuclear materials. So nuclear security is a national responsibility. So previously, we tried to qualify that although there is a much focus on international nuclear security mechanism, but these are the list of challenges that still exist, and that is why there is need to have another layer of security in the form of a regional cooperative mechanism. And when nuclear security is a national responsibility, why a regional mechanism? That is perhaps the first question that would generally comes to various discussion, because most states do not really want to have anything which basically binds them into a regional environment, in a regional arrangement, which they do not want to take additional responsibility. Ambassador Laura Holgate, that has done some significant amount of work during the while being at the International Atomic, while being a U.S. ambassador to the International Atomic Energy Agency and other international organizations in Vienna. She highlighted that every state has a stake in the nuclear security practice of their neighbors, allies, and rivals, because a nuclear incident anywhere in the world will have global implications. And when we look at and that responsibility comes through the legal obligations. Although in the previous section we talk about the weakness of legal measures, but I think there is some strength that as well in the legal systems which states can basically rely on, and that basically advocate for the need of an additional layer of security measures in the form of regional security cooperation. So there are a number of UN Security Council resolutions which talk about international cooperation and specifically regional cooperation, that those resolutions are binding on the states, and those strongly recommend entering into certain arrangements. And the Nuclear Safety and Security Conventions, for example, amended Convention on physical protection of nuclear material. The amended convention has a very strong focus on international cooperation, because states cannot really bypass the transboundary nature of a nuclear incident if that happens. So that's the basis of that convention as well. The two conventions mentioned below are primarily safety conventions, which came in the aftermath of Chernobyl accident. And it is, again, Chernobyl reminds us that states become active when there is some incident, and they are perhaps not really proactive in identifying a threat when they haven't seen it. And that's the problem with nuclear security. Just because a nuclear security incident hasn't happened, there is a lack of focus on what needs to be done to address the future threat. But these two conventions are an example where state became active when they realized that threat had already happened, and it was in the post-Chernobyl incident. And these two conventions also highlight the importance of the transboundary nature of the threat and the corresponding transboundary measures as well. And then there are nuclear terrorism conventions, and thank you. Nuclear terrorism conventions and IAEA voluntary guides and other commitments under the United Nations, as well as the Interpol. Interpol doesn't get much of an attention, but that is an area which has done significant amount of work when it comes to nuclear terrorism threat. And that is an area which is less securitized, because debates at the IAEA becomes more politicized, but the Interpol is an agency which just goes by the law and gets a lot of work done. So that's another important model we must not lose sight of. And then there are political and security obligations of the states, and that is why they do need to have, be more proactive and just not rely on the national measures. More significantly, nuclear risk reduction measures, that is important step in identifying and exclude nuclear candidate facilities. And nuclear security cooperation would actually be a means towards in the form of that it would basically strengthen your overall security. And it is very important for states in an adversarial relationship, because this would actually be a stabilizing factor. Because when we talk about nuclear weapons competition between India and Pakistan, I think the more the better in their equation, the more the number they have, or the secure nuclear infrastructure they have, they would have more strategic stability. But when it comes to terrorism, and the nature of competition basically stabilizes the environment. But in the face of a nuclear terrorism risk, it is actually the cooperation which would deter the adversary. And here the adversaries are not the two states who are already in adversarial relationship, but some non-state actor which might actually try to exploit the situation which is bad between the two states already. And the moral obligation, because since the nuclear security summit process, there is a lot of focus on the moral obligation in the nuclear security. While there is so much states can do in the legal framework, it's the moral obligation as well, which, because the transboundary impact of an incident which initiates in your state would have a responsibility on the state which to basically inform the state in the extended areas. And then there are various existing regional bodies which are already working in that domain. European Union, ASEAN TOM, the ASEAN Network of Regulatory Bodies in Atomic Energy Agency, UN International Crime and Justice Institute, and then there is Central Asian Regional Information and Coordination Center as well. So these are some existing regional frameworks that are existing already. So talking about quickly, moving on to the topic, how a nuclear security regime in South Asia might look like. In my proposal, it has to be a three-tiered approach, which starts from the national responsibility, leading to bilateral framework. And the third tier would be a regional broader framework. And this could be something which can look like this in the horizontal, on the vertical side, there is the national, bilateral, and regional responsibility. And on the horizontal side, the template looks at the starting from the analyses and coordination, moving on to the operationalization of the mechanism, which would have elements which work at prevention, detection, and response. And the third level of cooperation and engagement would be in the post-incident activities. So this broader mechanism contains a whole lot of menu of options which can basically work at the regional level. Would they all work between us hostile states like India and Pakistan? Perhaps not, but there is something which can probably be workable. And here I also want to us to remind ourselves that India and Pakistan, even in the worst of relationship, have actually worked on certain areas which would rather seem impossible. For example, during the 1989, they come up with the non-attack agreement on each other's nuclear facilities, which is one of the fine example where diplomacy and CBMs worked. And this is one area which has actually withstood the pressure of times. Even when there were worst of relationship between the two countries, both countries had a very regularly shared the exchange the list of nuclear facilities on each 1st of January each year, even at the worst of the relationship. So possibility of finding areas of mutual cooperation where non-cooperation is perhaps more problematic for both. So at the bilateral level, competent authorities coordination is important area. And before the formal talks set up a process broke down between the two countries, there had the last secretary level talk happened in 2012. And there were a list of nuclear security arrangements which were put on the table. But although they did not materialize, but appetite is definitely there to engage on the scientific and technical areas which are less securitized, which are more in line with what scientific benefit would be for both states. And then there is a lot of activity which happens at the track 2 dialogue and tabletop exercises has happened. And this becomes very important if we look at in a post-incident scenario situation, because as we all talk about the impossibility of a nuclear security event because it hasn't happened, but the situation suggests that just because it hasn't happened doesn't mean that we can be complacent about the potential risks. While the possibility exists, we need to continuously improve our security system so that it does not happen. But if there is a post-incident security situation, there is both countries need to work around because of the contiguous border and millions of people who live on the each side of the border, which can potentially be affected if there is a nuclear security incident on the either side. Border control working groups is perhaps still an ideal approach given the nature of a current relationship. But as I said again, both countries have found ways of working on difficult areas before. So I think there is once they realize that the threat exists, possibility of cooperation would follow. And bilateral information exchange of an incident. This is perhaps one of the proposal which was put on table in the last secretary level talk already. And there was, in principle, there was an agreement that this is something we can work around, but the political situation on the each side further deteriorated afterwards, and this did not really materialize, but that remains on the table already. And in the post-incident activities, investigation and criminalization, that is really, really important because, and even in some of the bilateral blaming of a cross-border terrorism incident, there are instances of cooperation in investigation and criminalization. So that's an area which potentially can be worked around. Quickly summing up some of the key findings that the research identifies the role of a nuclear security regime in mitigating the risk. First of all, it identifies that it's a distinct regime, and then it identifies what are its distinct rules, procedures, principles, and values, so that under the regime theory framework, and its application in the regional framework. The study highlights factors such as the mutual vulnerability from the risk of nuclear security threats, legal requirements, and states' political commitments for control, to compel the leaders to cooperate at these levels. The proposed security regime seeks to depoliticize or de-securitize the nuclear security debate, which in turn will facilitate framing nuclear security cooperation as a mutual interest and nuclear security risk as nuclear security threats as a common risk as a common threat, even among the competitive states, especially between India and Pakistan. And the study proposes a template of regional cooperative mechanism that can be built upon the principles, norms, rules, and procedures of the nuclear security regime. It is tailored according to the regional environment in South Asia. It has practical features that can range from ideal approaches. As I said, not all will happen, but there are some realistic measures which probably can be worked around. In conclusion, nuclear security remains a low probability threat, but with very high consequences, and that is why it demands attention and focus. It is important to depoliticize nuclear security debate because a lot of good work is lost in political rhetoric. When we look at the purely, at the technical details of this issue, there are a number of areas which can be worked around. Third, it remains a global threat. Regional response and gradual approach in South Asia is probably the way forward, and nuclear security cooperation as a deterrent against nuclear terrorism, because it's not the competition, it's actually the cooperation which would serve as a deterrent against a potential terrorist. So I stop here.
Great.
And thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Sitara. That was extremely interesting and well presented. So I appreciate it. Just a few ground rules to begin with. This is a tradition here that we begin with questions from our fellows. And so I'm looking at you fellows to ask the first question. And then we will move to more general conversation. For those of you online, I will be watching carefully. Please post your questions in the Q&A function, and we will definitely get to your question. I see I already have one posted there. But for the rest of you online, you can post to the Q&A function, and we will come around to you as well. So very much looking forward to our discussion. And who would like to go first? Kevin, thank you. Kevin Bustamante.
Or have other productive outcomes. So I'm wondering, what does that breakdown look like when you actually are there certain experts or people in certain bureaucracies, organizations of certain positions that are like, we don't need these measures, or how do you sort of think through this sort of discrepancy of why isn't it more popular, I guess, the support for it?
Say again the last word, please.
Like, why isn't there more sort of agreement that these measures are needed? Like, that's 60%, more or less, 65.
Yeah, I think the lack of confidence in the confidence building measures comes from the fact that confidence building measures in India and Pakistan become the first casualty when there is a crisis. They become the first casualty of any crisis in war, unfortunately, and they do not really transform the crisis situation in the region. So in the past few years, couple of years, specifically after the past two crisis situation, I think the confidence in the confidence building measures has reduced a bit because they are no more helping to stop the war or to stop the conflict, crisis turning into a conflict, right? But on the flip side, I think there is still, and these are the people who are, I talked to for this elite survey were people in the policy positions in current and past. And these are the people who understand, for example, the nuances of this whole situation. And so I think this actually gives, it still gives a positive answer to what we are trying to propose here. And this basically goes with my findings as well, that there is this, layer, there is this gap in the existing security measures. And also, I think, as I said, there are some people who understand nuclear security from a very technical perspective, but then there are people who are looking at it more from the political side. So I think the lack of confidence comes more from the people who are looking at it from the political side, and the political side is perhaps not really positive at the moment. But the people who understand it from the very nuanced technical aspects, they are more confident that this can happen and there is a potential for it to actually work.
Please go ahead and introduce yourself.
I'm Emily Tallow. I'm a postdoc here. And I'm going to ask the question Sitara already knows is probably coming, which is most of the confidence building things that you mentioned and secretary level talks all happened before the current government in India came to be in 2014. And with 3 subsequent crises that have occurred, including the most recent one in May 2025, I'm just wondering how, if you had to judge, and maybe this is an unfair question, and I apologize in advance, if you had to judge on a scale of 1 to 10,
unfair questions are fair in this.
if you had to judge how likely it would be that even one of these measures would get done in the next 10 years, or even 20 years, how likely would you say that is, and which one would it be? Which one's the easiest?
So if I put on my policy hat, non-proliferation side of the work that I've done, specifically on the CBMs, perhaps I would say there is a remote chance that any of this would actually materialize in near future. But on the same side, I think we should not lose sight of the fact that even during the worst of situations, both countries have made certain arrangements and agreements which perhaps seemed impossible. For example, reinstating the ceasefire agreement on the LOC, and likewise opening up Kartarpur for the religious visa-free entry to Kartarpur corridor. That happened few months after the 2019 incident. So there are things which have worked, which give some hope that probably, and the major challenge, I say again, with the nuclear security, any nuclear security cooperation mechanism is mainly because many people suspect that is it a real threat at all or not, because no incident has happened so far, luckily.
You know about.
Yes, something which would made headlines because it took Cuban Missile Crisis to start a series of arms control measures between US and Soviet Union. And it took a Chernobyl to all the states agree on the nuclear safety agreements, which were nearly impossible before that happened. So my is that it seems difficult because we haven't had, it's an abstract threat at the moment. Luckily, no radiological incident has happened. But if it happens, God forbid, it would be, it might not kill large number of people, but it would definitely be, as they rightly call a dirty bomb, a weapon of mass disruption, not a mass destruction, because it might not kill many people, but there would be huge political and economic cost attached to it. So it remains a challenge because we are looking at an abstract threat. But if something happens in that side, I think there would be immense change of mood and priorities, not just in India, Pakistan, I think worldwide.
Let's go here next. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Dipin. I'm a visiting fellow here. Thanks, Sitara. This was lovely. Two questions, if that's okay. One more clarification on your elite surveys. What was the demographic breakdown? Was it Indian elites, Pakistani elites, good mix? And if it was people from both sides, did you see any differences between how Indian elites thought about all of the things that you showed us versus Pakistani elites? And the second question is just kind of switching over to my CP side. Are there other arenas where we can think of cooperation as the answer to problems given the contiguous border between India and Pakistan, right? So the things I'm thinking about is, for example, air pollution or the Indus Waters Treaty, etc. There are examples of where the states have realized, for the most part, except 2025, I guess, where cooperation is the answer. So would you say that nuclear security regime cooperation is an exception still, even if we consider these other things? Or would you want to frame it in, as one of these issues where cooperation happens even under hostile circumstances? Does that make sense? Like, I think just in terms of broader framing, would you put this in the same bucket as other environmental things, or is it different, and why or why not?
So on the elite survey, there were more people from the Pakistani side, but there was significant number from the Indian side. And then there were some international scholars as well who work on South Asia. So those were the people who have been working on the CBMs and track twos and, focusing on South Asian security dynamics. And it was comforting to see that there was a near unanimity in the requirement of having such a talk. But everyone in different varying degrees cited the political challenges, right? So this is where, because it was not just survey, there were semi-structured interviews as well. And those interviews basically added nuances to, or qualified what somebody was trying to say. So the overall understanding or the overall sense that came out of these interviews and surveys was that everybody is perhaps very clear on the necessity of these things, but they do cite in varying degrees the possibility and impossibility of any such thing taking place in near future, given the nature of the government in India, for example, which had become more, inward looking and is perhaps less inclined to talk to Pakistan on any area of mutual concern. But at the same time, as you rightly pointed out, that there are other environmental issues, and pollution is one thing. There have been a number of times, if you recall, there was this data exchanges between the Indian Punjab with the Pakistani side of Punjab, and that was, I think, post 2019, one of those years. And so that's just another example where states or the officials within the states do sort of have the tendency to share information which is less political in nature, but has benefit for the general masses and the public at both levels. So I do not see it as, I cannot put it in the same category as the general environmental issue, for example, pollution, which is a significant issue currently for both countries, because this nuclear security is still something where a lot of sensitivities are involved, because if we go further down the nuclear cooperation, for example, nuclear forensics is an area which would be necessary to ensure this kind of arrangement. But would that be a possibility? Absolutely not. Not at all. Even if there are good relationships, because that would be a too sensitive an area to go down to. And so we need to separate what is doable and what is absolutely not doable. So that's how I frame it. Like, it is one of those issues, but not the simpler issues like pollution related issues and water. For example, water again has become sensitive. So it would, I think, stand more closer to the water issues, which has become politicized already at the moment.
All right, good. Let's go to Scott Sagan next, and then I have a couple questions I'll turn to online. And Sulgi, you're on my list too.
Yeah, Scott Sagan, the director here. I have a clarification question, but then a bigger one as well. Clarification question. I thought it was great that you included the NTI Nuclear Security Index showing that Pakistan had 49 and India 40. But can you clarify for us, is it going up or is it going down? Is 49 a good score compared to others? So if you could put that in context for us, clarification question. The bigger question is, back when I was working on these issues a number of years ago, I think the greatest inhibition on the Indian side for cooperation was a suspicion, some just a suspicion, some a pretty firm belief that the ISI was either running or aiding or minimally looking the other way on terrorist activities, and that therefore coordinating with the Pakistani government was actually going to open up vulnerabilities in a sense. Does that still exist? And is that one of the inhibitions at the broader political level? And what can you say about that?
All right. Regarding clarification, going up, this is score out of 100.
Right.
So up is better, lower is bad. And that is why India is...
But has it gone up over the last... They've been doing this measure for many years.
Yes. So
right.
Pakistan has improved significantly, and so has India. And this was actually as a result of NTI's index, where both countries, and I know for the fact, like from the Pakistani side, they decided to share some information. Although on the upfront, they would be like, I mean, we don't really care what an NGO like NTI says, but in the background, definitely they cared, and there were concerted efforts to share information. Because in Pakistan, I think there were a lot of work that had already been done in terms of publishing some regulations on the nuclear security, physical protection regulations. There were regulatory guides in place, there was laws in place, but it was just that they haven't shared that information. So they realized that there is just good if they share information, and their ranking actually shot up significantly. And India perhaps doesn't like its ranking with Pakistan further below Pakistan. But I think one point that India lacks at is, which I shared earlier, that they do not have an independent regulatory body, unlike Pakistan, which has an independent regulatory body. And that gives a better score on the NTI index, because a regulatory body working under the operator is perhaps, not at all empowered to basically keep a check or regulate what is being done on the safety and security side. So that's one thing. And inhibitions about India's suspicion that Pakistan's secret agencies are undertaking some of the covert activities inside India. I think this is where I think now Pakistan has come up with a massive amount of information, which has been acknowledged by some officials in the US as well, that India is trying to create subversion on the Pakistani side of in Balochistan province, and through Afghanistan supporting some of the terrorist organization on the Afghan-Pakistan border as well. So there is this blame game continuing for the longest time, but I think India's position takes more attention, because India's specifically after the, I think, in the post 9/11 environment, because India tried to link it with the transnational terrorism, right. And the sentiments that were the global sentiments that were against the international after the post 9/11. So India really tried to tie it down with that, and both countries are doing a lot of activities, illegal activities on each other's territories. It's just whose narrative sells better. Sometimes it's India, and Pakistan is trying really hard to put India on the spot as well. Like, no, you are actually doing a lot of... So there is continuous blame game that happens from the both sides. ISI has been doing things on the Kashmir side because they do want to continue to make Kashmir an international issue. And India is definitely doing a lot of terror financing and supporting Balochistan Liberation Army, for example, in the Balochistan province. There is this Indian naval officer who is currently serving in Pakistani jail, who was caught in the Pakistan side of Balochistan. So these issues are going to be there, and they would definitely, as we move forward, would not go away at all. Both sides will continue to hit each other wherever they find an opportunity. But in parallel, both countries have also worked on a number of positive aspects as well, because stability, certain level of stability of each other, certain level of stability on each side is on each side's interest. So they would want to ensure that that level of stability does exist, if that answers the question.
All right, thank you. Next, I'd like to go online to Tracy Wilson, who asks, would it be useful to have a technical reach-back capability to a U.S. nuclear laboratory, national laboratory, like the Sandia National Laboratories and its cooperative monitoring center that works with South Asia, that is to make sure that trafficking data is peer-reviewed, and there's an effort to make it more accurate. So it's a question about, would reach back to U.S. laboratories help to make the data more accurate in some of these reporting mechanisms?
I think the IAEA database works on voluntary basis, and this is up to the states if they want to report something. For example, if there are 3 incidents reported in the news and which has been verified by various news channels and various other sources, states perhaps would report only one of those to the IAEA database. So those are all together verified databases. And when we talk about open source databases, I think James Martin Center, for example, they for the longest time they had they don't do it currently, but they have maintained a database on the basis of open source information.
I see.
So,
but as far as you know, they don't interact with any of the national laboratories to clarify or check the data.
No, because that's actually based on, because they do not have access to any ground situation or the ground information, you know. And I think somebody from the US, in US, it would be nearly impossible, for example, giving access an incident that was reported, for example, 2 years ago in India, for example. India would definitely not allow any access to any US laboratory. And they would have no interest in having that verified as well. They would choose what they want to report through the IAEA, and that's the only mechanism they would perhaps adhere to. But the point of making reference to the databases is that the IAEA database, as I said, that's the voluntary requirement, voluntary action by the states. They choose to report or they might not choose to report. And that database is 100% authentic and verified and reported by the state resources. But that's not the complete picture, because there are a number of incidents that have been reported and verified through open source information, but they have not been reported. And the length of material that goes missing in the open source databases is much higher and much bigger than what is reported at the IAEA. So there is discrepancies, or as many people choose to say, that that's just the tip of an iceberg, what IAEA gets to know through the state resources.
I imagine for the labs it would be difficult because of their work in the classified arena as well. That would also be a factor, but it's an interesting thought. We have a question from Feroz Khan, who asks, have the head of the India and Pakistan Atomic Energy Commissions and regulatory authorities met? Have the heads met, either bilaterally or in Vienna, to exchange mutual concerns? Do you know of any such conversations?
And why don't you first explain who Feroz Khan is, if asking the question for the audience?
Please, you take that honor. Go ahead. Thanks for being online, Feroz.
Thank you for tuning in, Feroz. Feroz Khan is a former brigadier in the Pakistan Army, and he has served as the Director General of Strategic Plans Division, which is the within the that's the apex body that oversees the nuclear weapons in Pakistan. So he was the Director General in the Arms Control and Disarmament Affairs, which basically analyzes and looks at the international side of the things. And he has written phenomenal book and some of the most excellent book on Pakistan's nuclear history, Eating Grass, the Making of the Pakistan's Nuclear Bomb. So if anybody wants to have any insights in what Pakistan's nuclear, so that's an advertisement for Feroz.
Thank you.
And but the question, answer to that question, like have they met? Not that I know of. Even at the IAEA, I think in various under various IAEA frameworks, bilateral, the multilateral meetings do happen, but I'm not aware of any bilateral engagement that has taken place at the IAEA or any other. In some of the instances, although I know that some of the former officials from the Pakistan Atomic Energy Commission has took part in a couple of track 2 dialogues that has taken place outside Pakistan, but not in official capacity.
Very good. Thank you. Next, Ori Rabinowitz.
Hi, thank you for an excellent presentation. I wanted to ask if you can reflect on any strategic lessons the Pakistanis have learned from dealing with illicit trafficking networks, the CAN network. There are any lessons that were internalized in the institutions?
And we should say the AQCON network was, very active in acquiring the capability and capacity technically for the Pakistani bomb program to be developed in the first place, and he had an extensive network internationally. The lessons learned.
So I think Pakistan, so it is first of all to clarify that I was in this research, I was not covering the AQCON network specifically because that was the transfer of technology. Here, I'm narrowly focusing on the material, and that was not being done by them. But there were a lot of, since it coincides or since it relates to what we are discussing, I think there were a lot of lessons learned. And Pakistan had definitely tried to bridge the gaps that existed in which actually came to surface as a result of the discovery of the AQCON network internally. And there was this, since it was technology side, Pakistan had actually established a separate setup within its strategic framework, which actually looks at the export control, ensuring that export control is in place, and looking at all those setups within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So there is a separate office that has been established. And that was requirement of the UN Resolution 1540 as well, which basically ensured that no illicit export happens or illicit transfer of technology happens in that regard. And on the nuclear security side, I think Pakistan was one of the early countries that established its nuclear regulatory body in 2001, which was not only looking at nuclear safety, which was regulatory body primarily looks at safety side, but Article 16F of the regulatory body's statute, the ordinance, looks at specifically nuclear security from the regulatory perspective as well. And in 2006, Pakistan entered into an agreement with the International Atomic Energy Agency, and one of the early countries who ran Nuclear Security Action Plan project very successfully. And under that Nuclear Security Action Plan project, they had undertaken host of measures on finding, locating, and securing orphan sources across the countries. Across the country, they had established a training program. They have established illicit trafficking related mechanism, and within in illicit trafficking specifically on that regard, they have trained hundreds of customs officers who are actually manning the border, international border, and they are maintaining, they are having those handheld radiation equipments, and they have got training from the IAEA as well, and Pakistan have been training them themselves as well. And on the 5 international borders, they have international entry and exit points. They have established those radiation portal monitors as well. And now they have established a separate nuclear smuggling department within the Pakistan Customs, which intends to install more radiation portal monitors within the country as well, besides the international entry and exit points. So that's a massive program that is already rolling out as we speak.
Very good. Sugya Park, please.
Thank you so much for this talk, Sitara, a Park Research Scholar here at CSEC. I may have two-part questions and apologize if I missed this, but despite the discrepancies online, is there a breakdown of what kind of materials are going missing in terms of nuclear fuel cycle? Is it mostly natural uranium from the mine, processed uranium from milling facilities, or fissile materials at the back end? Like, is there a breakdown so that we know where the vulnerability lies? And looking at the nuclear infrastructure between India and Pakistan, like Pakistan is mostly dependent on China for the nuclear reactors, whereas India has a lot of indigenized nuclear reactors, even breeder reactors, which can theoretically breed a lot more fissile materials than the regular pressurized water reactors that Pakistan has. So does this asymmetry play a role in influencing cooperation between the two countries? Thank you.
Say again, the last part, asymmetric?
The asymmetry between the Pakistan and India's nuclear reactors, does that play a role in the way the two countries want to cooperate on nuclear security?
So I think currently India has about 24 operating nuclear power plants, which are generating, if I am sure, 25 operating nuclear power plants, and India intends to take it to 100 gigawatt by 2047. And currently in Pakistan, there are 6 operating nuclear power plants, which are all China-based. So there is asymmetry in terms of what amount of reactors and material, are being there. But if you look at on the weapon side, for example, there are, I think, some of the estimates from the International Fissile Material International Panel on Fissile Materials. India currently possesses almost 5 metric tons of AGU, and Pakistan possesses almost the same amount of AGU. And India has almost 10 metric tons of reactor-grade plutonium, whereas Pakistan has about 0.5 metric tons of reactor-grade plutonium. So there is a compatibility in there is a equality in AGU material for weapon-grade AGU, but there is asymmetry in plutonium. But that does not really make much of a difference. That is a debate that is a separate debate, because Pakistan wants to ensure that it has produced enough fissile material to match up India. That goes on the separate side. But on the security side, I think that does not have much of a significance, because greater the infrastructure, the greater a country needs to employ its own resources to ensure, because first and foremost, that security is necessary for their own nationals and for their own country. So I'm sure, regardless of how many power plant India intends to make, they would have corresponding security measures in place, because it's not how it impacts Pakistan. I think that is in the first place is necessary for their own security of their own people and environment and workers, right? So that does not really play a big role. This discrepancy does not, asymmetry does not play a big role in how they coordinate with one another, if that answers the question.
So basically, it's back to your early point that it's, in the end of the day, it's the national responsibility, and there's a reason for that, because of public safety concerns. Let's go back online. There's 2 really big questions here. Unfortunately, we are running out our clock, but they're really big questions, so these might be the last ones. Kayla Orta asks, she congratulates you on a great presentation and said, are there other regions, whether conflict prone or not, that could benefit from regional nuclear security mechanisms? And she cites Southeast Asia, where there are many newcomer nuclear countries that is looking to bring nuclear reactors online.
So actually, as part of this study, I actually look at what is the practice across the world, and EU stands out as the most important example where there is regional nuclear security cooperation already exists. In number of layers, in a number of ways, countries coordinate and share information, have bilateral and multilateral exercises on safety as well as on security sides. But the problem is that the EU is politically integrated, economically integrated, so we can't really replicate the EU model in countries in the region as fragmented as South Asia. But ASEAN is a region which I also happen to study for this region. And I think in the list of regional examples I mentioned ASEAN TOM, which is the ASEAN regulatory body joint setup, which is very, very significant and a good example to look at already that exists there. And they have a number of steps that they have taken is noteworthy, and because ASEAN region is not as politically or economically connected as the EU is. And so that for South Asia, I think ASEAN is actually a good example to look at, where despite the differences on their political outlook and economic outlook, they still managed to get some agreement. But the security environment is, again, not as bad in ASEAN as it is in between India and Pakistan, and in South Asia for that matter. And for South Asia, I think we can also look at Argentina and Brazil's example, where they tried to, where they brought in some bilateral arrangement despite having adversarial relationship between the two countries. So ASEAN is definitely, I have already included that.
Established. Yes, no, that's very good.
Yeah.
Thanks for recollecting that. And that Latin American, Argentina, Brazil example is long established. So that's a good one to think about as well. All right, here's another big question from online, this time from an anonymous attendee. Since India and Pakistan are not parties to the NPT and therefore operate under different nuclear governance structures than most states, what incentives would bring them into a regional nuclear security arrangement like the one you're discussing that actually seems to have embedded in it some of the measures that are in the NPT regime?
So that is why at the beginning, I stated and emphasized that it is important to see nuclear security as a distinct regime from the non-proliferation regime, because a non-proliferation regime has its own sets of challenges and benefits in terms of how the states cooperate and work. But it's really important to have that distinction, because nuclear security falls in a rather different category. And why I think there was part of presentation actually focused on that why question, because why there is need, because first of all, this is actually important for your own safety. You want to ensure that your own people are safe, and the existing security measures or the existing arrangements are not really up to the mark where you could actually confirm that there is a fail-safe arrangement in place. And secondly, it is also the legal requirement. Here I cited a number of international legal framework, starting from the UN resolutions, Chapter 7 resolutions, coming to the convention, the main nuclear security convention that is amended, as well as the original CPPNM's Convention for Physical Protection of Nuclear Materials. Those conventions actually demand or require the states to have certain, they don't force it per se, but that is strongly recommended under those conventions that you need to have international cooperation. And that is specifically a very important focus area in the amended convention. Not in the original one, but in the amended convention, that is a very important focus area. And this is actually a legal requirement, perhaps. Not, as I said, this arrangement goes beyond what is legally required. But I think, as I said, alternative is more problematic than taking on these additional measures, because if something happens between India and Pakistan, and I think in a worst case scenario, some non-state actor would actually benefit from perpetrating between the two states. And that is where I think countries need to look at and work around. It does not definitely require their relationships to be in the best form, which probably is a distant thought and dream. Hopefully it happens someday. But within the current security environment, I think it is really important to identify some basic areas which would strengthen nuclear security and stabilize strategic stability on the other hand. So that is why it is important.
Very good. We have time for one more question, so please go ahead and introduce yourself.
I'm Rishabh Yadav. I'm Fulbright visiting scholar at Google. So I'm thinking of regions as constructs. So I think India does not view nuclear landscape as a South Asia problem, but more of a Southern Asian problem. So the China also comes in China, India, and Pakistan. So when we talk about regional mechanisms, so in your interview, what political will or incentives do India have without China being into that regional mechanism? And then again, coming back to then Kevin's question, if China is also there, will the confidence among the strategic elites would increase when we talk about regional mechanism, including China?
We brought China in at last.
Yeah.
Thank you. But we only have 2 minutes left, so you'll have to wrap it up.
Just very quickly, I think this mechanism is more of a necessity than it is of what your strategic objectives are, more of a practical necessity. If something happens between, from the purely nuclear security perspective, and I go back to emphasize that it is important to see it distinctly from the non-proliferation questions. And China's question comes in when we talk about weapons number, for example, or risk reduction measures on the strategic stability side. That's definitely India would not do anything which does not involve China, and China would not do anything which does not involve US, for example. So it's a cascading effect that happens in the Indo-Pacific region broadly. So that's a very fair point. But on the nuclear security side, as I say, we need to see it distinctly from the non-proliferation and the strategic stability debates, because this is an area which would be basically the curse of borders. Although India and China do have borders, but they do not have facilities, nuclear facilities, for example, in the close vicinity. And even if there are some close vicinity, the nature of border is such that the transboundary impact of any nuclear security incident would be less than they would be compared to Pakistan and India, for example. So it is just the sheer necessity of the problem that would require India and Pakistan to work together, and not to forget what larger political debate exists, which is definitely overarching and impacts every decision the countries take. But I think if we look at it from purely very narrow nuclear security perspective on the technical grounds, then I see a possibility, and then I see a scope of it.
Thank you very much, and very, very interesting and detailed answers to many interesting and detailed questions. I apologize to those of you who did not hear answers. There were some great questions online that we didn't get to. So let us join together in thanking Sitara for her presentation. A final comment from me, if you are interested. Laura Holgate was quoted here. She's a very distinguished U.S. diplomat who has worked these nuclear security issues on the U.S. side for many years. There is a great issue of the American Foreign Service Association Journal. You can find it online, AFSA online, about nuclear security with a number of different authors. But Laura has a really good article there. It's this month. The AFSA Journal, I recommend it to back up what Sitara had to say. So thank you all, and great to see you here today.
Thank you.